to get more clarification or just to ask a question. That's what I'm here for. So, let's talk a little bit about nuts and bolts. Now, those of you that have heard my presentation before, Danny in particular, is very familiar with the product and knows kind of what we do, but I'm going to bore Danny and do it all over again, right? One of the things that we try to do and that we've really been good about sticking to our guns at with Gibson Acoustic is not changing how we build a guitar to get to a price point to make a guitar different than what Gibsons have historically been. We utilize technology to maintain the integrity of the build, to make the guitars more consistent, but it's more just monitoring of processes is what we use modern technology for, not actually doing the work. We use CNC machines just to rough carve our necks, but every neck is hand sanded to final shape. Every piece of wood is hand sanded to final thickness, hand assembled. Every burst, it's what we call sunburst, is hand sprayed. Every coat of lacquer, no robotics, nothing like that. We still have guys that stand in front of big buffing wheels 8 hours a day buffing these guitars. It's just great. It's very organic. For those of you that have seen the factory, it's not that kind of slick factory where you can eat off the floor. It's a wood shop. There's wood flying everywhere. There's lacquer fumes. It's old school. It's very organic, and it's fun. And the people that work there just love what they do. They just get to dig in every day. Excuse me. So, but there's some things that, one of the questions people ask is, why does your competition, or why can your competition offer these guitars at so much lower prices than you guys do? And my stock answer is, we don't want to. We don't want to change how we build a guitar to get to a price point. Having an entry-level guitar is a great thing. We have a company called Epiphone that works great for that. As far as the Gibson product, we want to build it a specific way, like they've always been built, and it's expensive. And so there is a point of no return for profitability on a guitar. We have to kind of figure all that out. And so, no, we do not have what most people would consider an entry-level guitar. But the guitars are so good and they last so long, lifetime warranties, that they are an investment, but they're probably one of the best investments you can make. You don't see used Gibson guitars hanging in stores for any length of time. They're gone, and Ben can attest to that. And that goes to any good quality, I'm just going to say it, North American-made guitar. The used ones, people look for them. They're everywhere. I mean, so it's a good investment. We want people to buy a guitar and keep it for the rest of their lives. We know that's not always the case, but you know that the investment is solid there. So I'm going to show you some. All right, well, the way we build guitars at Gibson Acoustic, it's unique for one thing. Every guitar we make is built exactly the same. Now you look at this J200 Vine and you look at this kind of modern, what we call avant-garde guitar, and you say, what do you mean? I say, the differences are in the materials, the amount of ornamentation that goes into it, and the amount of time it takes to put that combination together. That's what dictates the pricing and that kind of thing. But as far as how the guitars are built, we do not compromise on that just because of the price point of the guitar. And there's 4 things that we do on every Gibson guitar that makes us not better, not worse, just we're the only company that still does these historic things, from our least expensive guitar to our most expensive guitar. Generically, of course, people call them flat-top guitars. Our guitars are not flat-top. All of our guitars have a 28-foot radius top, a 12-foot radius back, but the top is the most important thing. And I'll pass this around. How they accomplish that is when they cut the braces, they don't cut the bottoms flat. They cut them in a 28-foot arc. And then when you glue that top onto those braces, it holds it in a dome. It adds a lot of complexity to the build because that top's coming down at an angle. When you glue it to the sides, you have to have the sides sanded at just the right angle to match up with that. But what it does from a tonal standpoint is, in a nutshell, the way a guitar creates tone, an acoustic guitar, is every time you hit a note, the top deflects. It's microscopic. It happens in a millisecond, but that top moves. It projects the sound into the body of the guitar. There, the shape of the guitar, the type of woods, whether it's rosewood, koa, maple, mahogany, tailor the tonality to give it the sound that guitar is going to have, then it's projected back out the sound hole. In a nutshell, that's an acoustic guitar. That's how it works. When you have a true flat-top guitar and you hit a note and that top does that deflection we're talking about, it moves. But if there's no tension built into that top, when you hit the next note, it's not going to be back at the same starting position. When you build that tension in there, it's like a speaker cone. Every time the bass note hits, you see the speaker cone move. When you build this tension in here, you hit a note, it's back. So even when you strum through all 6 strings, every note is better defined, every note has better clarity. In our opinion, that's what makes a Gibson sound like a Gibson. Is it the guitar for everybody? Obviously not. You know, people have asked me, what's the best guitar? And I always say if there was a best guitar, there would only be one guitar. But you look in a store like this, there's a lot of different preferences, what people like for sound, for size, for playability. But in our opinion, doing this dome top gives us the sound that has made Gibson what it is today and what our fans want. So we continue to do the dome top. Then we scallop the bracing, getting rid of any braces where it's not needed, just leaving the strength where it's needed to support changes in weather, changes of humidity, but keeping it as light as possible. And I will pass this around. And you can see, if you look across it, it's not flat. It actually has a dome to it. Number 2 of the 4 things that we kind of pride ourselves on doing is a lot of modern builders are utilizing what are called bolt-on necks, and that's exactly what they are. They bolt a neck to the body, and it's a great thing. It's cost-effective, it's quick. You can take it off, sand it, shim it, put it back on, make that playability just absolutely perfect. I mean, no one doubts that the day in, day out playability of Bob Taylor's guitars is the most consistent in the industry. We will give him that. He does a great job of using machinery, using tooling, using robotics to build, you know, fit and finish some of the best guitars in the industry. But the thing is, you know, there's not much wood to the body of a guitar. And when you can take this neck and make it part of the instrument that's creating tone, instead of just an attachment that's holding the strings, that's another thing that gives a traditionally built acoustic guitar a more roundness of tone, a better mid-range than you get out of a modern built guitar with a bolt-on neck. We still utilize a dovetail neck joint on every Gibson guitar. It's the highest learning curve job in the entire factory because the guys that put these necks on, they have to put them on there, they'll sand, they don't use any shims, they'll sand the body, sand the neck to get the alignment just right. And the thing too is they have to visualize, okay, the neck looks like this now, but what's going to happen with 200 pounds of string tension? Because it's going to change, it's going to raise up. And they just have to instinctively kind of get a feel for where it is and where it's going to land after it gets strings on it. Because the scary thing is, they neck fit the guitar. It has to go through the entire finish process, which we'll talk about, before we know, before it gets strings on it, gets string tension on there. And maple necks react differently than mahogany necks, so it's a very, very intensive training job. And there's only about a half a dozen people that we will allow to do that in our factory. It wasn't that long ago, our general manager, who's started out on the ground down there 25 years ago, was down there neck fitting for a day because he had 2 people sick and 1 guy on vacation, and there was no one else in the factory that could do it. So it's just that critical, and we just don't let anyone do it. Then we take it one step further. Before there were wood glues, before there were super glues, the adhesive that was used to make instrument was something called hide glue. It's made out of horsehide. It's granulated. When you heat it up, it liquefies back up. It's hot, it's messy. Excuse my coughs, I'm sorry. It's hot, it's messy stuff to work with, but it transfers vibration better than any other adhesive, which means when you strum a chord, you can feel that neck vibrate up here. I mean, all this is working for you. It's all tied together. It makes it just one unit, not some parts hooked together. The hot hide glue dovetail neck joint, again, is something we do on every guitar we make. We're not the only ones that do it. You know, Martin makes very traditional, great guitars from like a D18 on up. They still stick to their guns and build a great historic instrument as well. But we do this on every guitar we make, not just our upper level ones. So you got your dome top, you got your hot hide glue dovetail neck joint. Another process that technology has brought in to allow builders to create guitars at more cost-effective price points is the invention of the UV poly finish. And again, it's a fantastic thing. They spray it on, they put it under a UV light. 5 minutes later, it's hard as glass, looks great. It's a beautiful, beautiful finish on a guitar. But it's never going to change. It's never going to mature. It's never going to allow that guitar to become that vintage instrument like the historically built Martins, Gibsons, the old Epiphones, the old Guilds. We still use nitrocellulose lacquer, the real deal, on every guitar we make. 5-minute process for the UV poly finish, minimum of 5-day process just for the clear coat. The clear coat on these guitars is the most expensive from a time and labor and materials part of the entire build, believe it or not, just the clear coat. But we feel it's that critical. The nitro lacquer for decades and decades and decades will be getting thinner and thinner. It'll be gassing off into the atmosphere, being absorbed into the wood. As that happens, the guitar is allowed to breathe. It's allowed to just get better and better with time. You know, there's a lot of, we'll talk about some other concepts as far as making guitars more like vintage guitars, but nothing replaces time. And the only way you can make a vintage guitar, a real vintage guitar, is to make it like those old guitars were made back then. And the biggest part about that is the nitro lacquer. And again, there's a lot of places where we couldn't spray nitro, not without a major expense. Montana is still kind of the Wild West. We can still get away with a lot of things up there. And so we spray nitro on every guitar. You know, it's a 5-day process, and then if like when they get to the end, when they're like setting it up, they see like maybe debris or a hair or something under the coats of lacquer, they have to go back in and scrape down, remove that, spray it, and then it has to sit and rest for another 4 days before they can buff it. After the coats of lacquer are on, these guitars have to sit in a room for 4 days, because if you buff it too soon, it won't stay flat. So it's very, very time consuming, very expensive, but we feel it's worth it just for the end result, which is the tone. That's what you build the guitars for. So to reiterate, you got your dome top, you got your hot high glue dovetail neck joint, you've got your nitro lacquer, and the fourth and most important thing that we do is that we hand build every guitar. You could put 3 of this model, J45, side by side, and everyone's going to feel, sound, and play different. Every neck is hand sanded to final shape. Every piece of wood, top, back, and sides is hand sanded to final thickness, hand assembled. Like as I said earlier, no robotics. Every guitar is unique. When you pick up a guitar in a store, a Gibson Acoustic, and you strum it and you like it, it's the only guitar like that in the whole world. I mean, it's as much as we don't discourage people from going out and shopping around, you have to remember that. If you like that guitar, that is the guitar to get, because they are all unique and different. Any questions? Yes, sir?
What about the Gibson guitars that have the electronics?
The electric side of guitars, excuse me? Those are made in Nashville and Memphis. Those are still made very historically as well. They still have the nitro lacquer, but the build is totally different on the electric guitars. So we're not really going to go into that too far today. All of our guitars are made so you can plug them in, but they're not like like the Les Pauls or that type of thing. Someone else had a hand up.
Is it a challenge to source the raw materials for these guitars?
It's getting better because of controlled farming, reforestation. Over the past 25, 30 years, people have realized that it wasn't getting better. And all the manufacturers now are utilizing renewable resource woods, going to alternative woods, like walnut's a huge one that a lot of builders are using. It's North American sourced, European sourced. It's not from Brazil, Honduras, Venezuela, where there's not a lot of controls in a lot of cases. So we're just more careful about where we get our woods, and all of our woods that we use are certified. Basically, for every tree that is cut down, they're planting 10 these days. And you know, in most areas, and we try to utilize woods from those areas that are being responsible for that type of thing. But you know, you look at the sheer number. We're building about 80 guitars a day. You know, Martin and Taylor, between their U.S. and Mexican facilities, are building 600-700 a day each. Then you get companies like Yamaha and Epiphone, and these companies, the lower price companies that are building thousands of guitars a day. That's a lot of wood. And so yes, there is going to be a point of where we're at that point where we have to be responsible and make it work. So it was 20 years ago, it was probably worse than it is now, but I think just people are getting smarter about it. I'll go ahead and pass this around so you can see how the neck fits into the body. Any other questions while we're on this whole? Yes, sir. Robbie is our director of sales and marketing, and about 5 years ago he suffered a pretty extreme cerebral hemorrhage, a stroke, and he's doing very well though. He's back working, and he's not playing guitar yet. He says he will someday, but as of right now he's not, but I'm working at it really hard. So thank you for asking, Jeremy. So, let's talk a little bit about the guitars.